Hi, I'm Marissa. Last Saturday afternoon, I walked onto the state capitol stage with a metal ribbon waiting for my name and walked out with an ache so sharp it made my hands tremble. My eyes searched for the two front row seats marked family guests. They were empty. My husband never came. My kids never came. My sister was hosting a housewarming, and they chose her pool over my once-in-a-lifetime award. The governor smiled. Cameras flashed. My stomach turned. But that wasn't the worst part. The worst part was, it wasn't just one day. It was years of being sidelined, dismissed, and told my work didn't matter. Not at home. And in that hall, under those lights, it all finally sank in. So, what do you think happened after I stepped off that stage, with the medal in my hand and no one waiting for me? Before we dive in, tell me what time you're listening to this and where you are. Drop a comment below. I read everyone. The medal's ribbon felt icy against the side of my neck. My heels clicked as I crossed the marble floor, the sound too loud in my own ears. Applause still rang behind me, bouncing off the vaulted ceiling, but it no longer belonged to me. Backstage smelled faintly of lemon cleaner and old brick. I leaned against the wall, letting the cool surface press between my shoulder blades. My clutch buzzed in my hand. Another photo. Chloe in a wide, brim hat, Emma on her lap, Lucas cannonballing into blue water. The caption read, "Best Saturday ever." I stared until my vision blurred. Chlorine, sunlight, laughter. None of it was mine. Sophie, my colleague, found me there. "You were amazing out there," she said, eyes warm. I managed to thank you, but my voice cracked. She didn't ask why I was alone. Maybe she already knew. I walked to the Capitol steps. The late afternoon sun struck the gold on my medal, blinding for a second. A breeze off the Willamette River carried the scent of wet stone and something metallic, like rain on concrete. My car was 3 blocks away. Each step echoed in my ears. Couples passed me, chattering, their arms linked. Parents herded kids toward parked minivans. I kept my gaze ahead, the medal swinging against my ribs like a small weight I wasn't sure I wanted to carry. Inside the car, the air was stifling. I slid the medal onto the passenger seat. It glinted back at me, perfect and useless. My phone lit up again. 13 unread messages in the family group chat. All about Chloe's pool tiles, the barbecue menu, how the kids are having a blast. Not one about me. I didn't cry. I just sat there, hands gripping the steering wheel, feeling the leather grow warm under my palms. A song played on the radio, bright and upbeat, but it sounded far away, muffled like it came from another life. Driving home, the highway curved along the coast. The ocean flashed silver in the setting sun. For a moment, I thought about pulling over, just to let the wind strip away the smell of the Capitol Hall and the imagined chlorine from my skin. Instead, I kept going. When I reached my street, laughter floated from my sister's backyard. I slowed. Through the fence slats, I glimpsed my kids chasing each other across the lawn, their hair still damp, cheeks flushed. David was at the grill, Chloe pouring wine. No one looked up as my car passed. I pulled into my driveway, turned off the engine, and sat in the quiet. The house smelled faintly of salt air and closed rooms. I set the medal on the kitchen counter. The metal clinked against the granite, a small, final sound. Upstairs, I hung the navy dress in the back of the closet. My fingers lingered on the fabric, smooth, cool, still carrying the faint scent of the Capitol's polished wood. I shut the door. Lying in bed that night, the image of those 2 empty chairs wouldn't leave me. I realized they'd been empty for years, in more ways than one. Tomorrow, I told myself, something has to change. And for the first time in a long while, I meant it. The next morning, the house was still and gray. I poured coffee into my favorite chipped mug, the one Lucas painted in kindergarten. Bright blobs of red and blue now faded. Steam curled upward, carrying the smell of roasted beans through the quiet kitchen. I sat at the table, fingers wrapped around the mug, and my mind drifted backward. 5 springs ago. The air then had been warm, soft with the scent of blooming cherry trees. We'd packed a picnic sandwiches David made, lemonade Emma stirred, with too much sugar. Lucas carried a soccer ball bigger than his head. We spread a blanket beneath a canopy of pink blossoms at Harborview Park. Petals clung to our hair, and the breeze off the bay rippled the edges of our paper plates. I remember David sitting close, his hand warm on my back. "You're the glue, you know," he'd said, passing me a sandwich. "We couldn't do half of what we do without you." I'd laughed, embarrassed, brushing petals from Emma's curls. Lucas was chasing a kite, its tail flashing against the blue. Chloe had come that day, too, wearing a sundress and carrying a basket of brownies. She'd hugged me, whispered, "You're my role model, Marissa." Oh, the sun had been bright, but not harsh. Kids' laughter floated from the playground. I'd taken a deep breath, thinking, this is the life I wanted, messy, loud, but together. That afternoon, after we packed up, David snapped a photo of me with the kids under the blossoms. I'd framed it for the living room. For years, it hung above the couch, petals frozen in time. Now, sitting in my silent kitchen, that frame was gone. A different picture, Chloe's housewarming, hung in its place. I noticed it last month but didn't say a word. I sipped the coffee. It was already cooling, bitter on my tongue. The blossoms in my memory felt impossibly far away, like a story I'd read about someone else's family. Back then, every win, every milestone, felt like a shared victory. If the school praised me, David told the kids. If I stayed late to help a student, Chloe bragged to her friends. We were each other's cheerleaders. Somewhere between that picnic and yesterday's empty chairs, the cheers had faded to silence. It's strange how the mind holds on to certain sounds. From that day in the park, I can still hear Emma's high-pitched giggle when Lucas tried to juggle the soccer ball and tripped over his own feet. I can still hear David calling across the grass, "You're the star, Marissa!" as I caught the kite tail before it hit the ground. Those words had warmed me more than the sun. Back then, they felt true. Now, in the quiet kitchen, the only sound was the hum of the fridge. I traced my finger along the table's worn edge, remembering how Chloe had insisted we meet here, in my house, every Sunday. She'd said, "Family time is sacred." I'd agreed, without hesitation. But over the last few years, sacred had shifted. Chloe's family time meant gatherings at her new place, last-minute changes that left me out, excuses about convenience and space. I thought about the framed photo from Harborview Park. One evening last month, I came home to find it replaced with a glossy print from Chloe's Christmas party. She'd sent it to David and somehow, it ended up here without anyone asking me. I didn't say anything then. Just like I didn't say anything when they talked over my stories at dinner, or when David forgot to mention the teacher award until Sophie congratulated me in front of him. In the park memory, Chloe had pulled me aside, brownie plate in hand, and whispered, "If anyone deserves a medal, it's you." We'd laughed, clinking our lemonade cups. Yesterday, standing on the Capitol stage, that memory flickered and died. The shift wasn't sudden. It came like tidewater, each wave washing away a little more ground beneath my feet. I'd noticed the group texts without my name, the plans made without checking my calendar. The way Chloe's victories were events, while mine were footnotes. And maybe I let it happen because I believed, deep down, that they'd come back around. I finished the coffee, cold now, and rinsed the mug in the sink. Outside, gulls wheeled over the bay, their cries sharp and distant. When I opened the fridge, there was leftover pasta from last night. David had made dinner before heading to Chloe's. No note. No plate set aside. The park blossoms in my mind shivered and fell, scattering into the past. I closed the fridge and leaned against the counter. The sound of laughter from next door drifted faintly through the walls. My hand tightened on the counter's edge. I knew, in my bones, the next conversation with Chloe wouldn't be about kites or picnics. It would be about whose life was worth showing up for. And I was ready to find out where everyone really stood. Dinner at my parents' house always smelled the same: roast chicken, garlic bread, and my mother's perfume lingering like a second coat of paint on the walls. I walked in with a salad bowl, The kind of token dish you bring when you're not sure you'll be noticed. The kitchen buzzed with the sound of knives on cutting boards, chairs scraping tile, Chloe's laughter spilling from the dining room. She was at the head of the table, gesturing with a wine glass as she told a story about her new pool. "It's saltwater, you know. So much better for the skin," she said, smiling at my parents like she'd just invented the concept. I set the salad down, slid into an empty chair. David was already seated 2 places away, talking to my dad about grill maintenance. No one asked about my week. "So, Marissa." Chloe turned toward me with a practiced grin. "Hear you excited for? What is it again? Some kind of school thing?" "It's the State Teacher of the Year ceremony," I said. My fork clinked against the plate a little too hard. "Oh, right." She sipped her wine. "Well, my housewarming is that same weekend. We'll have over 50 people, neighbors, old friends. The kids are dying to see the pool." David chuckled. "They've been talking about it all week." My mother leaned in, lowering her voice as if it were a kindness. "Maybe you could reschedule, dear. These things happen every year, don't they?" "No," I said. "It's a once-in-a-lifetime award." Then the table went quiet for half a breath. Then Chloe laughed lightly, like I'd made a joke. "Well, I'm sure someone will record it for you." The roast chicken's smell suddenly felt heavy, clinging to my throat. I pushed peas around my plate. My father broke the silence, asking David about the barbecue menu for Chloe's party. David's voice lifted, warm, easy. Warmer than it had been toward me in days. I stared at the flicker of the dining room candles, the wax pooling in soft circles. Across the table, Chloe's phone lit up. She glanced at it, then smiled at David. I wanted to tell them what this award meant. How many nights I'd stayed up grading until my eyes burned. How I'd driven through storms to coach the debate team. How my students' letters had kept me going when the job felt impossible. But the words pressed against my chest and went no further. Chloe changed the subject to patio furniture, and the room shifted around her. My parents nodded along. David poured her more wine. The clink of the glass against the bottle echoed louder than anything I might have said. I picked at the salad, listening to the hum of conversation that flowed around me, but never through me. Chloe described the string lights she'd ordered from some boutique shop in Portland, how they'd cast the perfect golden glow over the pool deck. My mother asked if she'd chosen the menu yet. Chloe rattled off a list: grilled salmon, artisan bread, lemon tarts, and a chocolate fountain for the kids, she added, glancing at David. He smiled like she'd just read his mind. I pressed my palms flat against my thighs under the table. The fabric of my dress felt suddenly too tight across my shoulders. At one point, my father asked about the ceremony venue. My pulse quickened, ready to speak. But before I could answer, David cut in. "It's just at the Capitol building. You know, the usual stage, speeches, that sort of thing." "Just." The word lodged like a splinter. Chloe reached for the breadbasket, passing it toward my father without looking at me. "I can't imagine sitting through hours of speeches," she said. "At least my party will be fun." I set my fork down quietly, afraid it would shake. "It's not just speeches," I said, my voice lower than I meant. "It's the highest recognition a teacher can get in this state." Chloe tilted her head, smiling in that way that felt more like dismissal than agreement. "Well, I suppose it's nice for your RA. The room smelled of roast and candle wax, but underneath, I caught the faint taint-tang of chlorine, my mind supplying it from her words. I could almost hear splashing, the laughter that would fill her backyard while I stood on stage alone. Dessert plates appeared, and the conversation moved on without me. I ate a single bite of pie, tasting nothing. As coffee was poured, my mother leaned toward me again. "You'll understand, won't you, dear? The children have been so excited for Chloe's housewarming. It would be a shame to disappoint them." Something inside me went very still. I nodded once, not trusting my voice. When the dishes were cleared, David kissed my cheek lightly, already talking to Chloe about the grill cover she wanted. I gathered my salad bowl, cool porcelain pressing into my palms. In the kitchen, away from the table, I let my shoulders drop. The laughter from the dining room carried through the doorway, bright and careless. I rinsed the bowl under hot water, steam rising into my face. My reflection in the window above the sink looked tired, eyes shadowed, mouth set in a line I didn't recognize. Behind me, David called. We should head over to Chloe's early next weekend. Help her set up. The sponge slipped from my fingers into the sink with a dull splash. I didn't answer. That night, as we drove home, headlights streaking across the windshield, David hummed along to the radio. He didn't notice I hadn't spoken since we left. I stared out into the dark, my hands clenched in my lap, knowing I'd just heard the final confirmation of where I stood. And it wasn't beside them. Monday morning came with the steady drip of rain against the kitchen window. I booted up my laptop at the dining table, a stack of ungraded essays at my elbow. The smell of damp air and coffee filled the room. My phone buzzed on the counter. The family group chat lit up. Final menu for Chloe's party, followed by a stream of photos. Wine bottles lined on a granite counter, an inflatable swan floating in the pool, stacks of neatly folded towels in bright colors. I scrolled, thumb moving slower with each image. Lucas had posted a selfie with Emma, both wearing new swimsuits. David had added a message. Can't wait to see everyone there. Faye, not one mention of Saturday's ceremony. Not even a question about what time it started. I set the phone face down, the screen still glowing through the case. An email pinged on my laptop. Principal Harris reminding me to confirm the guest list for the Capitol. I clicked the link. Next to family guests, 2 empty fields blinked, waiting for names. I stared at the cursor, my chest tightening. A year ago, I'd imagined typing David Cole and Lucas and Emma Cole with a smile. Now, the emptiness felt almost fitting. I opened the family calendar on my phone. The week of the ceremony was filled with Chloe's party details. Set up Friday night, brunch Sunday morning. The square for Saturday had only one note: pool day. I closed the app too fast, the edge of my thumb stinging from the swipe. In the living room, the framed photo from her Christmas party stared back at me, all sparkling lights and coordinated outfits. My own living room. Yet the only trace of me in that photo was a blur in the background, half turned away. I walked to the window, rain streaking the glass in uneven lines. Chloe's house sat just beyond the hedge, her backyard hidden but loud in my mind. Music, laughter, the splash of water. My phone buzzed again. Chloe, hey, Marissa, could you bring your folding chairs to the party? We're short a few. I typed, I have plans Saturday. Then erased it. I typed again, they're in the garage, and hit send. A minute later, a heart emoji appeared beside my message. I went back to the table, picked up a student's essay, but the words swam. I could hear my own heartbeat, a slow, heavy drum in my ears. The essays slid into a pile. I pulled the Capitol invitation from my bag. A thick cream card with embossed lettering. The gold seal caught the light, warm against the gray morning. I set it beside my laptop, next to the coffee mug. It looked out of place, like it belonged to someone else's life. The rain picked up, pattering harder against the glass. Somewhere outside, a car door slammed, followed by laughter. I wrapped both hands around the mug, letting the heat soak into my skin, and wondered how many more empty spaces I was willing to sit through before I stopped expecting them to be filled. By mid-afternoon, the clouds thinned, leaving a pale light across the kitchen floor. I tried again to focus on the essays, but my phone buzzed with another message. This time it was from my mother. Sweetheart, I hope you're not upset, but the kids really want to be at Chloe's. It's a big day for her. I read it twice, the words sinking in like cold water. Big day for her, I typed a reply. It's a big day for me too, but stopped halfway. My thumb hovered over the send button before I deleted the whole thing. The sound of a mower drifted from next door. Chloe's landscaper. probably getting the lawn ready for all those 50 guests. Through the hedge, I caught a glimpse of blue tarp covering part of the patio, the corner flapping in the breeze. I opened my email again, staring at the empty family guests slots. The urge to fill them with anyone, friends, colleagues, even former students, was strong. At least they'd show up. Instead, I closed the browser, the click of the laptop lid sounding sharper than I meant. A memory flashed. Lucas at 10, bouncing on the couch with a handmade card for me after I won a district teaching award. "We're so proud," he'd said, his handwriting crooked across the front. I still had that card in a drawer upstairs. Now, pride had been replaced with convenience. My win was something to fit around their fun. I stood, pacing the length of the kitchen. The invitation still lay on the table, its gold seal catching the dull light. My gaze kept returning to it, like it was daring me to decide what kind of day it would be. The garage door rattled open. David came in, brushing off his jacket. "Chloe says thanks for the chairs," he said, dropping his keys in the bowl. I nodded without looking up. He grabbed a soda from the fridge. "You're still going to that thing in Salem, right?" "That thing," I repeated quietly. He didn't notice the edge in my voice. "I mean, it's just, the kids will have a blast at the pool. You understand. Understand." That word again, wielded like a gentle command. I pressed my palm against the table, the wood warm from the sunlight. "I understand," I said, but it came out flat, almost foreign. He took a sip of soda, completely at ease, and left the room. The silence that followed felt different this time. Less like an absence, more like a decision waiting to be made. I sat back down, pulled the invitation toward me, and ran my thumb over the embossed lettering. If the seats stayed empty, they would be empty by choice. And maybe that would tell me more than their presence ever could. Outside, the mower went silent, replaced by the hum of conversation and a short burst of laughter. I looked at the 2 blank lines on the guest list again, and for the first time, I imagined leaving them that way. The thought didn't hurt as much as I expected. In fact, it felt a little like relief. Tuesday afternoon, the halls at school buzzed with the shuffle of students heading for the buses. The scent of pencil shavings and floor cleaner hung in the air, faint but familiar. I stacked graded essays into neat piles, sliding them into my bag. A knock sounded at my classroom door. Sophie leaned in, her scarf a bright splash of color against the dull gray light from the windows. "Got a minute?" Sure, I said, waving her in. She dropped into a student desk, legs stretched out. I saw the ceremony notice in the staff bulletin. "State Teacher of the Year, you've been holding out on us." I smiled, small and tired. I mentioned it. Not enough," she said. "This is huge, Marissa. You should be shouting it from the rooftops." I shrugged, tucking stray papers into a folder. "Feels like no one's listening." Her eyes narrowed. "David. And everyone else," I admitted. "They'll be at Chloe's party." Sophie's eyebrows lifted. "You're kidding." "I wish." As she leaned forward, resting her chin on her hand. "Well, then they'll miss it. I'm going. If you don't have someone to sit in those family seats, I'll take one. And I'll clap loud enough for 3 people." The knot in my chest loosened just a fraction. "You don't have to." "I want to," she said, her voice firm. "I've seen you stay until 10 grading papers. I've seen you buy supplies with your own money. This award, you earned every bit of it." A laugh escaped me, light and unexpected. "You realize it's a 3-hour drive to Salem?" She waved her hand. "Well, make a road trip of it. Coffee, bad gas station snacks, the works." The final bell rang, echoing down the hallway. Sophie stood, smoothing her scarf. "Text me the time, okay? I'll bring flowers." After she left, I sat for a moment in the quiet. The classroom felt different, warmer somehow, even with the hum of the old radiator. I glanced at the invitation in my bag. For the first time since it arrived, I didn't see just the 2 empty lines. I saw Sophie's name filling one of them, steady and certain. Packing up, I caught my reflection in the window. My shoulders weren't as tight, my eyes not as shadowed. Outside, the late-day sun broke through the clouds, lighting up the wet pavement. I walked to my car with the faintest sense that maybe, just maybe, Saturday wouldn't feel so empty after all. The next morning, the air was crisp, sunlight catching in puddles along the curb. I carried a box of lesson plans to the car, the weight oddly comforting in my arms. Halfway across the parking lot, Sophie pulled in, her little hatchback humming like a sewing machine. She rolled down the window. "Morning, future award winner." I laughed, shaking my head. "You're relentless." "Someone has to be," she said. "Also, I brought you this." She held out a travel mug, steam curling from the lid. The coffee was strong and sweet, the way I liked it. "You're spoiling me." "Think of it as fuel for your victory lap," she said. Inside the school, the day unfolded in a blur of lessons and small crises. An eighth grader in tears over a lost essay, a printer jam that ate an entire stack of worksheets. Between classes, Sophie popped in with reminders about Saturday, departure time, snacks, playlist. By lunch, her steady enthusiasm had become a quiet anchor in my chest. In the teacher's lounge, I found a small envelope tucked into my mailbox. My name was written in neat, looping script. Inside was a card, pale blue with embossed lettering. "You inspire more than you know." It read. No signature. Just a pressed cherry blossom petal taped inside. I stared at it, heart thudding. The petal was fragile, its edges curled. It reminded me of Harborview Park and the way petals had landed in Emma's hair that spring day years ago. Sophie appeared in the doorway. "Everything okay?" I showed her the card. She smiled softly. "Looks like someone sees you, Marissa." When the words caught me off guard. Sees me. When was the last time I'd felt that from my own family? The final bell released a tide of students into the hallway. Sophie and I walked out together, her scarf trailing behind her. At the curb, she leaned against her car. "Saturday's going to be your day, no matter who's sitting in those seats. Remember that." I nodded, clutching the card in my hand like it was proof. "Thanks, Sophie." "Really?" She drove off, leaving a curl of exhaust in the cool air. I stood there a moment longer, the sky streaked with late afternoon light. When I finally climbed into my car, my phone buzzed. A new message from David. "Chloe needs help setting up Friday night. We'll be over there most of the day." I read it twice, the words pulling me back into the reality I'd been trying to push aside. The cherry blossom petal lay in my lap, trembling with the motion of the car as I started the engine. Somewhere between Sophie's promise and David's text, I felt the ground shift again, like the distance between us had stretched just a little farther. And I knew that when Saturday came, the empty seats in Salem would say more than words ever could. The state capitol smelled faintly of polished wood and fresh flowers. Light streamed through tall windows, scattering across the marble floor like spilled gold. I stood backstage, metal ribbon draped over my arm, palms damp. Sophie was in the second row, waving when she caught my eye. 2 seats beside her, marked "Family Guests," were still empty. The MC's voice echoed through the hall. "And now, our state teacher of the year, Marissa Cole." The applause rose, a warm tide that felt strangely far away. I stepped forward, heels tapping against the marble. The ribbon felt heavier than it should. From the stage, the view stretched across rows of proud families. Mothers leaning forward, fathers with cameras ready, kids bouncing in their seats. In the front row, my 2 empty chairs waited like open questions. The governor smiled as he placed the medal around my neck. The metal was cool, almost cold, against my skin. Flashes popped, bright spots lingering in my vision. I forced a smile. My jaw ached from the effort. The applause rolled on, a sound that should have filled me but left a hollow space instead. Somewhere in the folds of my dress, my phone buzzed. I didn't dare look until I stepped aside for the next honoree. In the shadow of the curtain, I opened the message. A photo filled the screen. Lucas in swim trunks, mid-laugh, Emma holding a dripping popsicle. David stood behind them, sunglasses on, arm around Chloe. The pool glistened behind them, blue and perfect. Caption: housewarming vibes. My throat tightened. I could almost smell chlorine, feel the humid slap of poolside air, hear the splash of water. The MC's voice called for a round of applause. I slipped the phone back into my clutch, fingers trembling. From the corner of my eye, Sophie clapped like the world depended on it. Her smile was fierce, defiant even. I wanted to hold on to that. The ceremony continued, names, applause, speeches, but I heard none of it. My gaze kept sliding to those empty chairs, as if staring might will someone into them. When the final applause faded, I stepped down the side stairs, metal swinging gently against my ribs. The air backstage was cooler, shadows pooling in the corners. I found Sophie near the exit. "You were brilliant," she said, pulling me into a quick hug. "Thanks for being here," I managed. My voice sounded smaller than I intended. We walked toward the Capitol steps. Outside, the late afternoon sun painted the street in honeyed light. People lingered, laughing, posing for photos. I kept my clutch closed, as if not looking at the photo again might make it less real. But it sat there in my mind, bright as the metal around my neck. And for the first time, I realized the picture told the truth more clearly than any speech could. We lingered at the top of the Capitol steps while other honorees posed for photos. The metal caught the sunlight, flashing in short bursts as I moved. Sophie insisted on taking a picture of me against the columns. "Smile like you mean it," she teased, her voice warm. I tried. The corners of my mouth lifted, but the smile never reached my eyes. A gust of wind swept through, carrying the scent of rain on stone. The crowd began to thin. Parents gathered their kids, chattering about dinner plans. Laughter drifted into the street, light and unburdened. We walked toward the parking lot, my heels clicking on the pavement. I glanced down at my clutch. Against my better judgment, I pulled out the phone. The photo was still there, bright and sharp. Lucas's hair plastered to his forehead, Emma squinting in the sun, David's hand on Chloe's shoulder. Every detail was a reminder that they weren't here. "They look happy?" Sophie said carefully, glancing at the screen. "Yeah," I replied, my voice catching. "They are." We reached my car. Sophie hugged me again, longer this time. "You deserve better than empty chairs, Marissa." Her words hung in the air long after she left. Driving home, the metal lay on the passenger seat, sliding with each turn. The late sun dipped toward the horizon, painting the clouds in streaks of orange and pink. When I pulled into my driveway, the sound of music and splashing floated over the hedge. I sat there for a moment, engine ticking, hands still on the wheel. Through the narrow gap in the fence, I saw Chloe's backyard glowing with string lights. The pool shimmered, dotted with floating candles. My children's voices rang clear, carrying the unfiltered joy of a summer night. I looked at the metal. In the fading light, it seemed smaller somehow, almost fragile. Inside, the house smelled faintly of salt air and dessous. I set the metal on the kitchen counter, its clink against the granite loud in the quiet. I stood there, listening to the muffled sounds of celebration next door, and felt the strange, steady pulse of resolve. Maybe they hadn't just missed the ceremony. Maybe they'd been missing from my life for a long time. And maybe, just maybe, that was about to change. Would you see it as selfish or justified to put your own milestone above a family gathering? Would you forgive them for choosing the pool over the podium? Or decide the empty chairs said enough? I want to hear your take. What would you do? Sunday morning, the house was still, except for the slow tick of the wall clock. Outside, the gulls called over the bay, their cries sharp against the muted air. I sat at the kitchen table, a mug of coffee cooling beside me. The metal lay off to the side, half hidden beneath yesterday's newspaper. My laptop chimed. A new email had arrived. Subject line: Invitation to join the National Education Policy Advisory Project, Washington, D.C. I clicked it open. The words swam for a moment before settling into focus. They'd followed my work for years, they wrote. They admired my commitment to underserved students. They wanted me on their team as a consultant. 6 weeks in the capital, travel and housing covered. My fingers hovered over the trackpad. The rain-speckled window blurred the hedge outside, Chloe's house hidden in the gray. 6 weeks away. Away from empty chairs. Away from conversations that turned my milestones into afterthoughts. I read the email again, slower this time, tracing each sentence like it was a lifeline. This wasn't just a job offer. It was proof that someone, somewhere, had been paying attention. I reached for my coffee. It was cold now, bitter. I drank it anyway, the taste grounding me. The fridge hummed behind me, a steady, low note. I glanced at the metal under the paper, still new, still shining, but already losing its place in the room. Without overthinking, I opened a new message. The cursor blinked at the top of the reply. My hands hesitated over the keys. I thought of David's text about helping Chloe. I thought of Sophie's voice in the second row, clapping like it mattered. I thought of the email's opening line, "We would be honored to have you." I typed, "Yes, I accept." The click of the send button was quiet, almost anticlimactic. But in my chest, something shifted, small, sure, irreversible. I closed the laptop and sat back. The bay breeze slipped in through the cracked window, carrying the faint scent of salt and rain-soaked earth. Somewhere next door, a door slammed, followed by the sound of voices. I couldn't make out the words, only the cadence, lively, unbothered. I wrapped both hands around the coffee mug again, letting the cool ceramic sit heavy in my palms. 6 weeks away. 6 weeks to remember who I was before I started waiting for a seat at someone else's table. The clock ticked on, steady and unhurried. And for once, I didn't feel like I was the one running out of time. That afternoon, I walked down to the waterfront, the wind lifting strands of my hair. The tide was out, leaving the air thick with the smell of kelp and brine. Seagulls dipped low, their wings flashing white against the muted sky. I found a bench facing the bay and sat, the wood damp from last night's rain. My phone rested in my lap, screen dark. I didn't need to look at it to know there'd be no messages from David asking about my day. The email replayed in my mind, word for word. "We would be honored to have you." I whispered it under my breath, testing how it felt in the open air. It sounded both foreign and familiar, like a language I used to speak but had forgotten. A jogger passed behind me, shoes slapping the wet pavement. Somewhere down the boardwalk, a child laughed, the sound bouncing off the water. I closed my eyes, letting the wind press cool against my face. For the first time in a long while, I didn't feel the need to hurry home. There was nothing there I needed to rush back to. When I finally stood, my hands slid into the pockets of my coat. My fingers brushed against the small card Sophie had given me. A cherry blossom petal taped inside. I held it for a moment before tucking it back. By the time I reached my street, the lights were on at Chloe's house. Music floated across the hedge, low and steady. I paused at my front door, listening. David's car was in their driveway. I unlocked the door and stepped into the stillness. The air inside was cooler than I expected, as if the house itself had been holding its breath. I set my bag down, the thud echoing faintly. In the kitchen, the metal was where I'd left it. I moved it to a drawer, closing it with a soft click. Upstairs, I pulled a small suitcase from the closet. The zipper rasped open, loud in the quiet room. I set it on the bed and stared at the empty space inside, imagining the clothes I'd pack. The ones I loved but rarely wore here. From outside, laughter erupted, loud, uncontained. I crossed to the window, pulling the curtain just enough to see over the hedge. Lucas was in the pool again, tossing a ball to Emma. David sat at the edge, feet in the water, Chloe beside him with a drink in hand. They looked like a family photo in motion, every frame complete without me. I let the curtain fall back into place. Downstairs, I sat at the kitchen table with a notepad. On the top line, I wrote, Washington, D.C., 6 weeks. Underneath, I started a list. The pen moved faster than I expected. Names of people I wanted to call, places I wanted to see, ideas I wanted to share. The page filled, then another. When I finally stopped, the music next door had shifted to something softer. My own house was silent except for the steady tick of the clock. I looked at the list, at the possibilities it held, and felt a quiet certainty settle in. This wasn't just leaving, it was beginning. And they didn't know yet. The clock on my nightstand glowed 2:17 a.m. in soft green digits. I lay on my back, staring at the ceiling, the shadows shifting as a car passed outside. The house was silent except for the occasional creak of settling wood. Through the cracked window, the faint salt smell of the bay drifted in, cool against the back of my throat. I rolled onto my side, the sheets twisted around my legs. My eyes fell on the half-zipped suitcase leaning against the wall. Its empty mouth waited, like it already knew it would be filled. The email from DC hovered in my mind, bright as if it had just arrived. My yes still felt fresh in my chest, a steady thrum beneath the unease. I closed my eyes, but the images came anyway. 2 empty chairs in the Capitol Hall, the flash of the pool's blue water, Sophie's hand warm on my shoulder. Somewhere outside, a buoy bell clanged faintly in the harbor, its low note cutting through the dark. I reached for the notebook on my nightstand, flipping it open to the list I'd made earlier. My pen hovered above the paper. I added a line. Leave without apologizing. The words looked stark in the dim light. I traced them once with the tip of my finger, as if sealing them in. David's steady breathing filled the room, turned toward the wall. In the quiet, I wondered if he had any idea what my yes meant, or if he'd already decided it wouldn't matter. I thought of the first time I stood in front of a classroom, chalk in hand, a room full of expectant faces watching me. That nervous thrill, that feeling of purpose. It was the same flicker I felt now, even in the middle of the night. The tide was coming in, I could hear the shift in the water's voice through the open window. I set the notebook down and lay back, pulling the blanket up to my chin. My heart had slowed, but my mind stayed awake, counting the days until departure. When sleep finally came, it was shallow and quick, like stepping into a pool before you're ready. And somewhere between waking and dreaming, I knew I had crossed a line, one I wouldn't be stepping back over. The next time I opened my eyes, gray light seeped through the blinds. My body felt heavy, as if the night had weighed me down. David was already gone. The faint scent of his aftershave lingered in the air, mixed with the cool breath of morning. I sat up slowly, the blanket sliding into my lap. My gaze went straight to the suitcase. Still half-zipped. Still waiting. In the bathroom, the mirror showed a face that looked older than I remembered. Eyes shadowed, hair flattened from sleep. I splashed cold water over my cheeks until my skin tingled. Downstairs, the kitchen was silent. I poured coffee, the gurgle of the pot loud in the stillness. On the counter, my notebook lay open to the page from last night. Leave without apologizing. Stared back at me, underlined twice. I took the mug to the table and sat in the same chair where I'd read the DC email. Outside, fog clung low over the bay, turning the water a dull pewter. Somewhere beyond the hedge, I heard the faint thud of a car door, followed by voices. Chloe's laugh was unmistakable. Light, practiced, filling the space between words. I traced the rim of the mug, listening. I wondered if David was over there, sipping coffee beside her kitchen island, planning the final details of her party. The thought didn't sting the way it might have a week ago. It simply settled, heavy but clear, on top of all the other proofs I'd collected. I finished the coffee in slow sips, letting the bitterness coat my tongue. Then I stood, crossed to the suitcase, and pulled it fully open. From the closet, I chose a navy blazer I hadn't worn in years, smoothing the sleeves before laying it inside. A pair of heels followed, then a silk blouse, each piece placed with deliberate care. It wasn't packing for a trip. It was marking a line in the sand. By the time I zipped the suitcase shut, the fog outside had begun to lift. Shafts of sunlight broke through, spilling across the floor in pale gold. I rolled the suitcase to the corner of the room and left it there, in plain sight. A reminder to myself. A warning to anyone else who bothered to look. Upstairs, The bedroom window was open just enough for the sea breeze to move the curtains. I stood there for a moment, breathing it in. 6 weeks away. I whispered it aloud. It sounded like air filling my lungs after too long underwater. The sound of a lawnmower started up next door, drowning out the rest of the morning. I let the curtain fall and turned away. There was still one thing left to do before I left, and I already knew exactly how I would start. By Thursday morning, the fog had burned off early, leaving the bay bright and sharp. I sat at the kitchen table with my laptop open, the family calendar glowing on the screen. My eyes moved down the list of events. Friday, help Chloe set up. Saturday, pool day. Sunday, brunch at Chloe's. Every square wrapped around her schedule, her house, her celebrations. I opened a second tab. The itinerary from the DC, project coordinator. Meetings, site visits, evening receptions. A full slate that had nothing to do with them, and everything to do with me. One by one, I began adding those events to my own calendar. Each click felt like setting a brick into place. Next, I scrolled to the family group chat. Messages about menu changes, playlist debates, last-minute decor. My fingers hovered over the keyboard, then typed. Won't be available that weekend. I hit send before I could think twice. A moment later, Chloe replied with a thumbs-up emoji. No question, no surprise. I sat back, staring at the faint reflection of my face in the laptop screen. This was what it felt like to reclaim space. Quietly, without permission. In the afternoon, I drove to the bookstore downtown. The air inside smelled of paper and brewed tea. I picked up a slim leather-bound planner, the kind I used to keep before my life became a patchwork of other people's needs. At the counter, the clerk asked, "Gift, wrap?" "No," I said. "It's for me." He back home, I set the planner on the desk in the spare room. The room had been a catch-all for years. Extra chairs, boxes of old holiday decorations, forgotten stacks of mail. I cleared the desk, wiping dust from the surface until the wood shone. From the drawer, I pulled out a set of pens Sophie had given me last Christmas. "For your brilliant ideas," she'd written on the tag. I uncapped the blue one and wrote across the first page, DC, 6 weeks. I began making lists, packing essentials, contacts to reach out to, talking points for the advisory meetings. The pen moved fast, filling lines with plans that had nothing to do with backyard pools or brunch menace. At some point, the light shifted. Late afternoon sun spilled across the floorboards, painting them in gold and shadow. The bay breeze slipped in through the cracked window, lifting the edge of the planner's cover. I placed my hand on it, holding it still. This room would be my base until I left. A place where the noise from next door couldn't touch me. In the kitchen, my phone buzzed again. I didn't look right away. I finished the page I was writing, dotted the last with care, and closed the planner. When I finally checked the screen, the message was from David. "Chloe wants to borrow the big cooler for Saturday. Where is it?" I stared at the words, then set the phone face down on the counter. The cooler could wait. Everything could wait now. There were other things, my things, that needed to come first. Friday evening, the street was alive with the thud of bass from next door. Through my living room wall, I could hear voices carrying over the hedge. Laughter, the scrape of chairs on Chloe's patio, the splash of something heavy hitting water. I stayed in the spare room, the planner open beside me. My suitcase was half-packed now, neat stacks of clothes arranged like puzzle pieces. Each item I folded felt like a quiet answer to every dismissal, every time they'd turned away. The phone lit up again. "David, we're starting early tomorrow, pool prep. You don't have to come by." I let the message fade without reply. Instead, I emailed the DC coordinator, confirming my arrival time and asking for the address of the apartment they'd arranged. Her response came within minutes. "We're excited to welcome you. Keys will be waiting." That sentence sat warm in my chest long after I closed the laptop. In the kitchen, I pulled the big cooler from the pantry. The lid creaked as I opened it, empty. Clean. I set it by the garage door. If they wanted it, they could come get it. I wouldn't be delivering anything. The air outside had cooled, the faint scent of charcoal drifting over from Chloe's grill. I stepped onto my back porch with a glass of water, the condensation slick against my fingers. Through the gap in the hedge, I saw silhouettes moving against strings of golden lights. Lucas tossed a towel to Emma, both laughing. David stood with his back to me, leaning toward Chloe as she gestured with a wine glass. I turned away before they could see me watching. Back inside, I zipped the suitcase shut and rolled it into the hall. The sound of the wheels on the hardwood was oddly satisfying. A low, steady rumble that felt final. At the desk, I slid the planner into my tote bag along with the pens, the cherry blossom card from Sophie, and the capital invitation. The clock in the hallway chimed 8. Next door, the music swelled again, a cheer rising above it. I let the sound wash past me without slowing my hands. By the time I set the tote beside the suitcase, the house felt different. Lighter, like the air itself had shifted, making more room for me. I stood in the doorway of the spare room, looking at the cleared desk, the bare floor. It no longer felt like a place for things I didn't know where to put. It felt like the beginning of something. Tomorrow, they would gather around Chloe's pool, the water lit like glass under the sun. And I would be somewhere else entirely, in my own lane, on my own terms. Would you call this petty, or simply protecting your own ground? If your family made it clear their place wasn't beside you, would you keep showing up for them, or quietly start building a life without their seat at the table? I'm curious where you stand. Saturday morning, sunlight poured into the kitchen, catching on the rim of my coffee mug. The air smelled faintly of toast from the neighbor's yard, and underneath it, the tang of chlorine drifting over the hedge. I was at the stove scrambling eggs when David came in. He wore a faded t-shirt and shorts, hair still damp from a shower. "Morning," he said, pulling open the fridge. "Morning," I replied, keeping my eyes on the pan. He grabbed a bottle of water, leaned against the counter. "We're heading over to Chloe's in an hour. Pool's heating up. You sure you don't want to come by?" I turned off the burner, sliding the eggs onto a plate. "I have plans." "Plans?" He took a sip of water, eyebrow lifting. "Anything I know about." I set the plate on the table, the fork clinking against the ceramic. "Probably not." He studied me for a moment, the casual smile fading, just enough to show the question underneath. "All right, what's going on?" I sat down, fingers wrapping around the warm mug. "I accepted a consulting position in Washington, D.C. 6 weeks. Starts in 2 weeks. The silence that followed was sharp, like the pause before glass shatters. His bottle of water thudded onto the counter. 6 weeks. Marissa, that's... What about the kids? The house? They'll be fine, I said. They have you. And Chloe. His jaw tightened. This is out of nowhere. No, I said, meeting his eyes. It's been coming for a long time. He ran a hand through his hair, pacing once across the kitchen. You didn't even talk to me about it. I took a sip of coffee, letting the heat steady me. I didn't think it would change your answer. The sound of laughter floated in through the open window. Lucas and Emma, already next door. David glanced toward it, then back at me. So that's it, you're just leaving. I'm choosing something that's mine, I said. He exhaled hard, leaning on the counter. You know how this looks. Yes, I said, standing. Like someone finally stopped waiting to be included. The words hung there, the hum of the fridge filling the space between us. He shook his head, half in disbelief, half in frustration. You're making a mistake. Maybe? I said. But it's mine to make. I carried my plate to the sink, the faint scrape of porcelain against stainless steel cutting through the quiet. David opened his mouth, closed it again. His hands rested on his hips, the way he stood when a conversation was done in his mind but not in mine. I wiped my hands on a towel, folded it slowly. I need to finish packing, I said, and walked out of the kitchen without waiting for his reply. In the hallway, the light from the front window spilled across the hardwood, warm under my bare feet. I could still feel his gaze following me, but I didn't turn around. The suitcase waited at the foot of the stairs, the navy blazer folded neatly on top. The planner sat beside it, a bookmark tucked into the page for my first meeting in D.C. Through the window, another burst of laughter rose from Chloe's backyard, high and unbothered. I let it fade into the background. Upstairs, the spare room smelled faintly of cedar from the open closet. I sat at the desk, flipping open the planner. The next 2 weeks were already blocked out. Calls, preparations, travel details. Every square was full. For the first time in months, not a single one of them had Chloe's name on it. I was halfway through organizing documents for DC when I heard his footsteps on the stairs. Slow at first, then faster, like he'd decided mid-climb to stop holding back. David appeared in the doorway, arms crossed. "You really think this is the right move? Leaving like this?" I didn't look up immediately. "Yes." He stepped into the room, gaze sweeping over the suitcase, the blazer, the neatly stacked folders. "You've planned all this without me. Without even asking how I felt." I set my pen down. "I know exactly how you feel. You've shown me for years." He frowned. "That's not fair, isn't it?" My voice stayed calm, but my pulse was quick. "You've prioritized everyone else's milestones over mine. This award, this job, none of it mattered enough to show up." He opened his mouth, then closed it. The silence stretched, broken only by the faint tick of the hallway clock. "I was trying to keep the peace," he said finally. The kids. I interrupted. "Will learn that their mother doesn't disappear just because someone else makes noise. They'll see me choosing myself. Maybe that's the most important thing I can teach them." His gaze faltered. "You think they'll understand?" "They don't have to. Not now." I stood, the floor cool beneath my bare feet. "But they'll remember." From outside, Chloe's voice rose, calling for another round of drinks. Laughter followed, a bright spike in the otherwise muted air. David looked toward the window. "So you're just done?" "I'm done waiting," I said. He rubbed the back of his neck, frustration tightening his jaw. "And what happens after 6 weeks? You come back and everything's fine." I shrugged. "We'll see. Maybe I'll come back different. Maybe I'll come back knowing exactly where I fit, and where I don't." He stepped closer, lowering his voice. "You're burning bridges you can't rebuild." I met his eyes. "Some bridges aren't worth crossing again." For a moment, neither of us moved. The gulls cried over the bay, the sound sharp against the heavy quiet between us. Finally, he stepped back, hands falling to his sides. "I guess you've already made up your mind." "I have." He lingered in the doorway as if there was more to say, then turned and left. The sound of his footsteps faded down the hall, then down the stairs. I stood there a moment longer, the weight of the exchange settling over me. Then I zipped the suitcase fully, the sound loud in the still room. Downstairs, the front door closed. I looked out the window and saw him walking toward Chloe's, shoulders hunched, head down. I closed the curtain. The suitcase stood ready, the planner on top, a boarding pass printed and tucked into the cover. In 2 weeks, I would walk into a new city where no one knew me as someone's wife or sister or convenient extra set of hands. I would walk in as myself. Would you call this reclaiming your life, or walking away from it? If you were in my place, would you stay and keep playing the same role, or take the chance to write your own story? I'd like to hear which side you're on. The morning air at the Portland airport carried a faint tang of jet fuel and wet concrete. I stood near the departure board, tote bag over my shoulder, suitcase handle warm in my palm. 2 weeks had moved faster than I expected. Every day had been a step further from the house, from the hedge, from the voices that once pulled me in. I thought about how quiet the house had been since that conversation with David. We still spoke, but it was stripped down to logistics. Who was picking up the kids? when the bills were due. No small talk, no questions about my packing. The night before, I'd had dinner alone. The sound of the fork against the plate felt louder than the TV in the background. Through the open window, Chloe's party noise had floated in as usual, but it didn't press on me like before. It was just sound. I'd spent the last week confirming details with the DC coordinator, checking into the apartment online, mapping out the commute to the advisory office. Sophie had stopped by with a small stack of note cards, each with a handwritten quote she thought I'd like. The top one read, "Your worth isn't up for a vote." I kept it in the planner's front pocket. At the gate, a group of business travelers clustered near the charging station. A mother knelt to tie her daughter's shoe. The little girl's backpack shaped like a fox. I watched the scene for a moment, the hum of boarding announcements filling the space. My phone buzzed. A message from David. "Have a good trip." No emojis, no extra words. I typed back, "Thanks," and put the phone away. The boarding line began to move. The wheels of my suitcase made a low, steady rumble on the carpet. The air smelled faintly of brewed coffee from a kiosk nearby. When I stepped onto the jet bridge, the cool rush of conditioned air wrapped around me. My shoulders loosened without me realizing. Inside the plane, I found my seat by the window. The tarmac stretched out below, gray and glistening from a morning shower. I set the tote under the seat, the planner resting on top. The seatbelt clicked into place. I leaned my head against the window, watching a ground crewman in a neon vest guide a luggage cart. My suitcase was probably in there somewhere, tucked between strangers' belongings. As the engines spooled up, a vibration moved through the floor into my feet. The captain's voice crackled over the speaker, calm and practiced. We began to taxi, the rows of lights along the runway blinking in the distance. I kept my gaze forward. For the first time in a long while, I wasn't thinking about who might be watching me leave. I was thinking about where I was going. The plane lifted smoothly, pressing me back into the seat. The city shrank beneath a thin veil of clouds, the Willamette River curling like a strip of silver through the gray. I watched until the last familiar outline dissolved into the cloud cover. Only then did I lean back, letting my eyes close for a moment. The cabin smelled faintly of brewed coffee and recycled air. A soft chime signaled the seatbelt sign turning off, and people began to move, stretching, flipping through magazines, murmuring to seatmates. I reached into my tote, pulling out Sophie's stack of note cards. The second one read, "You can't heal in the same room that made you bleed." I turned it over in my fingers, the paper warm from my hand. Somewhere below, my house sat quiet. The spare room would be gathering dust again, my suitcase's absence leaving a square on the floor. I pictured David at Chloe's kitchen island, coffee mug in hand, and felt nothing sharp. Just distance. I ordered tea from the flight attendant, the steam curling up to fog my glasses for a second. Outside the window, the clouds thinned, revealing patches of farmland stitched together in green and brown. The hum of the engines was steady, almost like white noise. My body began to relax into the rhythm of it. I opened my planner to the first DC meeting date, tracing the outline of the week. The pages smelled faintly of fresh ink from my notes. A sudden burst of turbulence rocked the cabin lightly, jolting my tea. I caught the cup just in time, the warmth soaking into my palms. The seatbelt sign blinked on again, a polite reminder to stay still. I thought about how much of my life had been spent bracing for impact that never came, flinching at storms that passed me by. Now, for the first time, the shaking didn't feel like a threat. It felt like movement. As the plane leveled, sunlight broke through on the right side, flooding the easel in pale gold. I turned my face toward it, eyes half closed. The note card still rested in my lap. I slipped it back into the planner's pocket, sealing it like a promise. Somewhere ahead, the Potomac River would glint under the same sun, and the city would open to me like a clean page. And for once, I wasn't afraid to start writing. 1 year later, the navy dress hung on the back of my hotel room door, its fabric catching the morning light. I slipped it on, the smooth weight settling across my shoulders like an old friend. In the mirror, the woman looking back was different. The lines around my eyes were still there, but they softened when I smiled. My posture was straighter, my gaze steady. Downstairs, the lobby buzzed with voices, educators, policymakers, students from across the country. The air smelled faintly of coffee and fresh flowers from the arrangements lining the registration desk. I pinned on my name badge, Marissa Cole, keynote speaker. The words still made my chest tighten, but this time it wasn't nerves. It was pride. Walking into the conference hall, the lights were warm, not harsh. Rows of chairs filled quickly, the low hum of conversation rising and falling. On the front row, Sophie sat with her notebook open, grinning when she saw me. I thought of the first time I'd stepped on a stage in this dress, the two empty chairs glaring at me from the front row. Today, the seats were full, friends, colleagues, people who had chosen to be here. The organizer caught my eye and gave me a nod, my cue. As I climbed the steps to the stage, the faint scent of the polished wood rose around me. The microphone was cool under my fingers. I took a breath, feeling the fabric of the dress move with my chest. "Good morning," I began, my voice carrying without strain. A year ago, I stood on a stage much like this one, holding an award I'd worked my whole career for. And I thought that moment was about recognition. But I was wrong. It was about direction. Faces in the crowd leaned forward. Sophie's pen hovered above her page. "Sometimes," I continued, "you have to lose the audience you thought you needed, to find the one you were meant to speak to." And the words landed in the quiet, steady and sure. And for the first time in a long time, I felt exactly where I belonged. Applause rose, not the polite kind, but warm and sustained. I let it wash over me, steady and grounding. The lights no longer felt blinding. They felt like sunlight. After the session, people came forward. Teachers from rural schools, young women just starting their careers, even a retired principal who clasped my hands and said, "You reminded me why I started." In the hallway, the scent of fresh, brewed coffee mingled with the faint tang of paper and ink. I stopped at a tall window overlooking the city. The Potomac shimmered in the afternoon light, traffic moving slow along the bridge. Sophie joined me, holding 2 cups. "For the keynote speaker," she said, passing one over. We stood in comfortable silence for a moment, watching the river. My reflection in the glass looked at peace. "It's different this time," I said quietly. "How so?" "I'm not looking for anyone in the crowd who didn't show up." Blanche smiled, tapping her cup against mine. "That's because you're too busy looking at the ones who did." Later, in my hotel room, I hung the navy dress carefully in the closet. The medal from last year's ceremony lay in a small box on the shelf, not forgotten, but no longer the center of the story. I sat at the desk, opening my planner. The pages ahead were full: meetings, workshops, a trip to visit a school in Maine. Life I had chosen, written in my own hand. Outside, the city lights began to flicker on, each one a small declaration against the dark. I thought about the hedge back home, the muffled sound of pool water, the voices that once decided my place. They were part of my past, but not my boundaries anymore. This was my stage now, my table, my voice, and I intended to use it. If you've ever stood in front of empty chairs and wondered if you mattered, hear me when I say, you do. The question is, will you keep waiting for them to fill, or start building a room full of people who already see you? I'd love to hear your story.